Hello, my name is Elizabeth Parker, and I am a student at Austin College studying East Asian politics. As part of my studies here at Austin College, I am creating a video on social media in East Asia, particularly surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. The objective of this video is to provide an engaging way for you to learn about how social media works in East Asia, particularly how it is censored in East Asia and how it can be used to either spread misinformation, delay information getting to the public, and how it revolves around COVID-19. Before we get into how COVID-19 is affected by media and how media is censored, it's important to understand what social media looks like in China. Social media is a vastly different world in China. A lot of the things that we see here in the United States don't exist in China. For example, Facebook is not available to the Chinese public. Google is also not available. In fact, anything run by Google code is banned from use in China. A lot of Chinese social media is created from Chinese government or Chinese businesses that the government can control as well as censor. Some of the most popular forms of social media in China include Sino Weibo, which is a microblogging app and website similar to both Facebook and Twitter. It's kind of like a mixture between the two. There's also TikTok, which is very popular here in the United States. Over there, it goes by a Chinese name, and it works in the same way, except it is much more heavily censored within China's borders. The third app that we're going to be talking about is called WeChat. This is a text messaging app. If you're familiar with GroupMe, it's similar to GroupMe. It's for group text and individual text between people. You can upload pictures to this, but it isn't like Facebook where you put on a post for all of your friends to see. That is more of a Weibo application. So Weibo, you can have stories where you post miniature videos. You can have posts where you add pictures and a paragraph describing what you're doing. You can have direct messages and comments on all of your posts from people. Before we get into censorship on particular items, it's important to understand where censorship comes from. In the Chinese nation, there are several levels of government. There are local governments that maintain control of provinces, and then there is the national government, or what's called the central government in China. The central government is the People's Republic of China, and it is run by the Communist Party. Now, there's an important distinction between the party and the government. However, at the moment, Xi Jinping, the current president of China, is also the general secretary of the party. So both the party and the government are under the control of one person. Additionally, the government is completely under the control of the Communist Party. There are several departments within that central government that are in charge with propaganda and media. The first is the Central Propaganda Department. This is a department within the Communist Party, and it is in charge of censoring media and deciding what stories can be used and how they can be used in Chinese social media. The second is the State Council Information Office. This is a government office that works in a similar way to the Central Propaganda Office. However, the State Council Office tends to be a bit more stringent on their policies, and we're going to talk about that later. The third office is the General Administration of Press and Publication. This is important to know because it really relates to newspapers and the spread of news throughout China. It doesn't have as much to do with censoring social media, but it is important to know because it does control some of the news that we get out of China, and it heavily controls the news that Chinese citizens get within China. One of the leading scholars in this area is Qing Tai. He is a scholar who has studied Chinese media censorship in detail, and he did a study involving secret information releases guiding offices and social media posts on how to conduct and how to censor their own media. So basically these informational papers were handed down by the government to either newspapers, Weibo administrators, or WeChat administrators to guide them on how to censor and to tell them what was allowed and what was not allowed. These messages were largely kept secret. However, when this study was done, a couple of administrators, either within the Chinese government or within the media center, decided to leak some of these documents. And this author, Tai, studied 1,400 of these directives, read every one of them, and divided them into 4 categories. The first category were directives that banned topics entirely from the media. Basically, they were directives that said you cannot talk about this in the media. The second category was topics that were right on the edge of media being able to talk about them. Basically, this second category, what the government did was they said you can talk about them, but only in this way. And we're going to see an example of this in just a minute. The third category was news sources that could be talked about but could not appear on the front page and only got a limited amount of time on how it could be reported in the news cycle or how much it could be talked about on social media. The third category was directives in which the Communist Party highly encouraged the spread of a certain news source. So, for example, the speech that Xi Jinping gave at the National People's Conference one year was highly encouraged to media outlets to report on or social media to promote because it was a speech that Xi gave himself, and it was a speech that strongly supported the Communist Party. So out of all of these directives, most of them, in fact 80% of them, came from the central government or the national government. So that's the Communist Party or the People's Republic of China government. 80% of those directives came from that central government. Only 19% of directives came from local government, but it is important to note that local government can censor media, and it does happen. It happened in Wuhan when people started talking about the coronavirus on social media. The Hubei province administrators, Wuhan is in Hubei province, censored several posts and news sources on COVID-19 and how the administration had handled COVID-19. So local governments can in fact censor media. Among the national government agencies that we talked about earlier, the Central Propaganda Department sent out 79% of those 1,400 informational directives. The State Council Information Office only sent out 17% of those directives. So the Central Propaganda Department sends out the mass majority of directives on how to control social media and the news. One thing that I went into was examples of how certain things were banned or controlled. For example, before a National People's Congress meeting in 2007, the CPD, which we talked about, the Communist Propaganda Department, issued the following directive. The following news and topics should be banned completely. 1. The reports on Chang Sewei. 2. A journalist wrote an open letter to some NPC deputies. 3, Beijing collected 14,000 signatures to revise the property law. 4, news on Beijing evening news about a woman prosecutor who caught corrupt officials by acting as a prostitute. 5, suggestions about Wenhui News to allow journalists to directly participate in the NPC discussions. And 6, anything that is not related to the NPC meeting but might catch people's attention. So this was right before a National People's Congress meeting, and this is a huge meeting of the government in which government officials give great speeches and advise on policy. So you'll notice among some of these are suggestions that would allow journalists to participate in the National People's Congress discussions. That was banned from even being mentioned in the news or on social media. And then additionally, 6, anything that is not related to the meeting but might catch people's attention. This basically gives the government an open-ended ability to comment on what the media produces and how it might violate their own rules. Another example that Tai gives in his article highlights some of the conflicting instructions that take place between the CPD and the SCIO. So we talked about these two departments earlier. The CPD is part of the Communist China, or the Communist Party, excuse me. The SCIO is part of the government. And sometimes they cross wires and they inform the media on the same topic but in different ways. So the directive from the CPD on a train wreck in Wenzhou said media should not report the information released by the Ministry of Railway, media should report the information released by the Ministry of Railways in a timely manner. Media must report the number of casualties according to official reports. Reporting frequency on this issue needs to be controlled. Media needs to report on the citizens who donated their blood and the taxi drivers who drove the injured to the hospitals. Do not investigate the causes of the accident. Do not comment or reflect on this accident. In other words, the Communist Party of China is stating that you can report on this, but you can't say these things, and you need to focus on people who donated blood and taxi drivers who helped drive injured to the hospitals. Additionally, reporting frequency on this issue needs to be controlled. In other words, it cannot be a front page news article, and it can't be reported several times throughout the day. You have to limit the amount of time in which you report it. In contrast to this, the SCIO instructions stated any article other than one recent update regarding the Wenzhou train accident should not appear on any website, especially the front pages. All websites should implement this directive immediately. This SCIO will check the results of implementation in 30 minutes. This is a much stricter view of how news companies should report on this accident, but they're left in the dark on who to listen to. What ended up happening was they probably listened to the CPD because they are the Communist Party in charge. But it should be noted that the SCIO carries just as much weight. Sometimes these conflicts create issues in the government, and this is important because sometimes uncensored news leaks out as a result, and this can be beneficial to us trying to understand China from an outside perspective. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Xi Jinping and the modern era of media censorship. Xi Jinping has set a very different tone for the country. First of all, Xi Jinping does not rely on communal governing. Rather, he governs himself. It is much more a dictatorship than it is an authoritarian government. As a result, Xi Jinping has strictly cracked down on social media in China, and his administration has offered more regulations than many presidents before him. One of the leading scholars on China today, Elizabeth C. Economy, wrote in one of her articles, under Xi, Beijing has also issued a raft of new internet regulations. One law threatens punishment of up to 3 years in prison for posting anything that authorities consider to be a rumor, if the post is either read by more than 5,000 people or forwarded over 500 times. Additionally, she wrote, unsurprisingly, in its 2013 rating of internet freedom around the world, the US-based nonprofit Freedom House ranked China 58 out of 60, tied with Cuba. Iran was the only country to rank lower. So at 58 and 59, you have Cuba and China who were actually tied in score. Iran was the only country to have a more restrictive media. What's interesting about this is that China doesn't ban social media entirely. Again, hundreds of millions of people use Weibo, WeChat, and TikTok. But all of this is censored by thousands and thousands of media censorship employees who constantly go through internet posts and news sources, banning anything that goes against Communist Party directives. One of the examples of this is actually Winnie the Pooh. In 2013, this picture of Winnie the Pooh walking with Tigger next to Xi Jinping walking with Obama went viral on Chinese social media. As a result, people on social media started using Winnie the Pooh as a nickname for Xi Jinping in order to avoid certain censorship markers. So this allowed some of the citizens in China to write about Xi Jinping, but use him under the name Winnie the Pooh. Now Winnie the Pooh has been banned from the Chinese internet. You are no longer allowed to write on Winnie the Pooh or use that name. That name is now censored as well. Now, what censors these things? Other than the government, what technology censors them? The biggest thing is called the Chinese firewall, or the Great Firewall, sometimes dubbed. The Great Firewall is a cybersecurity network that prevents outside servers from getting access into China, and it prevents citizens of China from gaining access to outside servers. This means that unless a server or a site is based in China, Chinese citizens are not allowed to use it. It also means that the Chinese government has effectively blocked any website it chooses to. This firewall also censors certain keywords or sayings or political pieces. As an example, I looked at this site. This site is a China firewall test. You can type in any URL you would like and see if it's allowed in China. I typed in www.scmp.com. scmp.com is the South China Morning Post.com. It is a newspaper based in Hong Kong, and it's actually an excellent resource for news in East Asia that is accurate and truthful and not controlled by any government. But as a result, as you can see, it is blocked within China. That means that if I were in China today, I would not be able to access the South China Morning Post. And this is pretty accurate. The last time I visited China was about 5 years ago now, but at the time I was not able to access any Google site. I was not allowed to access Facebook. I was not allowed to access any of my social media that I had at the time. So this Chinese firewall has been in service for years, and it works pretty well. Now, let's talk about social media and the coronavirus. One of the biggest things, as you can see, surprisingly, are pandas and faux noodles. Now, what do pandas and faux noodles have to do with the coronavirus? Well, these have been co-opted as images to take place of certain words phrases, or people. Faux noodles stands for false information that might have been given about the coronavirus within China. The panda is a national symbol of China. It's a national treasure. And so on social media, it has been co-opted to be used in place of government administrators in Hubei province who are in charge of coronavirus handling, as well as the central government leaders. So both of these things have been used as symbols on social media so that citizens of China can talk about the coronavirus without running into those censor firewalls. There is an excellent news source from the South China Morning Post on these symbols and how they're used in China. I highly recommend, and I will post the link in the comments. It'll give you more information on how some of these symbols are used and why they become so effective in climbing over that firewall. Now, I'd like to change subjects for an ending note, and I want to touch for a minute on Taiwan. And there's a very important reason for this, because Taiwan is actually a democratic government in East Asia. It is not covered by this Chinese firewall, and it fairly stands for freedom of speech and expression throughout the island. Recently, the social media or the media minister of Taiwan, her name is Audrey Tong, she's been doing interviews all over the world on how Taiwan used social media to handle the coronavirus. Rather than tracking their citizens, they instead decided to track masks, so that people didn't go out and wait in lines for mask deliveries. They could look up on their phone where masks were, how much were in stock, and where they could get them. Additionally, the government was then able to use this app to send mask supplies to provinces that were particularly low. It's important to note that this app wasn't created by the government. In fact, this app was created by people called civil hackers in Taiwan. Audrey Tong, in an interview with NPR, described civil hackers as civil engineers for the internet. She said their job is to connect people with apps and technology that can better the societal and political lives of the people of Taiwan. Basically, Taiwan was able to use social media as a tool in their belt to help stop the spread of COVID-19. And because they have been so forthcoming on their social media practices and policies, the public trusts them in their social media presence. As a result, today, Taiwan still has a total of 7 deaths from COVID-19. They never shut down. Bars remained open, schools remained open, businesses remained open. Nothing has closed in Taiwan. The case numbers have stayed at a little over 500. That's out of about 23 million people. Taiwan has been able to effectively use social media to protect its people, and that's not the only policy that helped them combat the coronavirus, but it was an instrumental tool in helping them. I wanted to add this in because it helps bring forward the discussion on social media in governments. Today, through this lecture, we have seen 2 examples of 2 very different governments in East Asia and how they use social media. We've seen an authoritarian government block social media and use it to control its citizens, and then we've seen a democracy use it to do good in the world. Whatever your opinions may be on China or Taiwan, here's the important thing that I want you to take away from today's video. How much information did you not know before seeing this? How much could you stand to learn from China and Taiwan? All of this information today is vital to our role as global citizens. All of this information helps us to understand other cultures and learn from the lessons they provide. From this lesson, we have learned that Taiwan's media presence can do a great amount of good in the world. We have also learned that China's media is something we need to watch out for and be knowledgeable on. Unfortunately, though, this isn't something widely known in the United States. It's not something widely studied, and that's why I'm giving this presentation today, because we need to widely study it. We need to widely understand it. We need to be aware of it. So if there's anything you take from today's video, please let it be the resources that you can use to learn more. The South China Morning Post is a great one. Elizabeth C. Economy is another excellent author on Chinese politics and current affairs. Please take this opportunity to learn more, to educate yourself, because that is how we're going to learn more about our world and know how to solve some of the greatest problems facing our world today. Thank you for listening. I hope you've learned some great things today, and I hope you enjoyed this video.